Welcome to another edition of the Hail to Michigan podcast. I'm your host tonight, Matt. I'm joined tonight by Contown. Ronnie's unable to join us tonight, but Contown, how are you?
I'm on top of the world right now. A little emergency pod here. I'm gonna crack a cold pop live on air, and yeah, feeling good, man. Jim, the jackhammer, not going anywhere.
Yeah, so obviously, breaking story tonight. Jim Harbaugh has informed Michigan that he is returning for the 2022 season. Reported by Adam Schefter, and Schefter followed that up with mention that Harbaugh has told Ward Manuel that this would not be a reoccurring issue, and that he would stay at Michigan as long as it wants him. Obviously, the return is huge for the program for a number of reasons that we'll get into here. But I think that the second tweet is almost, the second bit of information is almost as important. That not only is he back, but he's committed to the job for, at least as of today, the long term. So, what was the immediate reaction on your end? How'd you find out the news?
Yeah, so I just by chance had opened the board, went over to the board, Michigan Insider, 24/7 there, and I saw a post, all caps, whatever, Harbaugh returning to Michigan, and yeah, I didn't believe it at first. I talked a little before air. I thought it was, someone's gonna be like, Jack Harbaugh is flying back to Michigan tonight for to go to his grandson's recital or something. But there was Schefter's tweet. Opened it, checked it about 5 different ways to make sure it wasn't one of those troll accounts, and then it felt like we had just won a football game. I mean, it's special. You posted the Bo Texas A&M turn down video, and I mean that kind of feels exactly like that. I'll let you take credit for that because you'd brought that up a couple times throughout this saga. So yeah, that's really what it feels like. Jim gets his little Bo moment here.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things, and I completely understand the sentiment from the media and the fans. How does he come back from this? This public flirtation with the NFL, and my response to that initially was, I think it's easier than what the public makes it out to be. And I actually said in this past week, he just gives his Bo speech, like it seems corny and all that, but it's true. I mean, it's an easy sell when you're an alum, when you're selling to, your current players or staff, you just tell them, yeah, I tested the waters. I wanted to see what it was like at the next level. And, I decided that it was more important to me to be here. Whether or not he was offered, I think definitely will be either confirmed or denied here moving forward. But it really, from Michigan's standpoint, it's irrelevant. He's back and committed to being there for the long term. And I think, just overall, it was a weird process. Initially it was reported as the Raiders were the main team that he would test the waters with. Mm-hmm. And then, this whole Vikings thing comes pretty late in the process, and he seems to be, obviously by taking the day-long interview there, pretty serious about entertaining that specific job. And it just kind of felt like things were moving away from, the possibility even of him being back. What was your kind of, what was your feelings, your thoughts throughout kind of the ebbs and flows? how did you respond to the news? What did you think throughout the process? Because it was obviously a roller coaster of a ride. So take me through like how you felt about everything throughout this whole dalliance with the NFL.
The first, between the playoff and now, and especially like to the end of January, kind of the semifinal to the end of the month there, nothing really felt like real or substantive. I probably added a syllable to that word, but I'm a little way through this beer now. But you mentioned the Raiders, and I think everyone connected Jim to that job. And I think Jim really would have listened to that job, but I don't think he was ever a real candidate there. They identified a few other candidates pretty early. They obviously had the interim coach who a lot of the players were supporting and hoping for. And they end up with Josh McDaniels from the Patriots. But I don't think there was any real connection. Jim knows the Davises well. He started his coaching career as the quarterbacks coach in Oakland after retiring from the NFL. And then on Jim's end, I do think he has an affinity for the NFL. Obviously, he loses to his brother in the Super Bowl, and then things get bad between him and ownership in San Francisco, and that's how he leaves the NFL and comes to Michigan. And I do think part of him wants to win a Super Bowl, or at least has always wanted to win a Super Bowl. So I think it was very real that he was going to listen to NFL teams that approached him this cycle. But that doesn't change, or that can be true at the same time as this can be true, that he loves Michigan. He loves being here. This has been his best year at Michigan, not only record-wise, performance-wise of the team, but in terms of just his family's happiness being around town, how people react to seeing them, how recruiting is going, the staff. Like, it's a young staff that I think has really made him appreciate the game. And then Michigan again, kind of a renewed appreciation with guys like Mike Hart and Ron Bellamy on staff. Mike Elston coming to join now. So I don't think any of this, keeping himself open to NFL options has anything to do with, him having a diminished appreciation or desire to be here in any way. The Super Bowl and the NFL has just always been something on his mind. And so you get through kind of most of the Raiders process, and he's never really a candidate. Some people bring up a few other jobs here and there, but there's always only really smoke. And then the Vikings go out and hire Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as their GM. And he was with the Cleveland Browns. He's an analytics guy. But more importantly, he overlapped with Jim in San Francisco for 1 or 2 years. I believe 2 years. And he also has somewhat of a connection to Matt Weiss, kind of through the analytics, general football, sports analytics world. They both have master's degrees from Stanford, but I don't think they were there at the same time. But either way, there's this connection there. And then the Vikings thing becomes very real. And there's a call, and it's not clear where Jim is in the pecking order. But then as soon as he gets the in-person interview and gets on the plane, as you mentioned, it felt like it was going to happen. Just because it's clear that Adofo-Mensah really likes Jim. Jim was probably his top choice for the job, one or two, and then it's just up to the owners and the interview and how it goes. And only Jim knows his thought process when he got there, but in terms of coming back and the thought process and turning the job down, not getting the job, whatever happened. But in terms of coming back, it's exactly like you said. It's not a hard sell. You can give the corny speech, the cheesy speech, whatever that, I went, I tried it out. This is where my heart is, blah, blah, blah. I'm committed to Michigan. This is my home. But, a lot of football is kind of cheesy speeches. Football's an emotional game. And you can't tell me there weren't cheesy speeches going around. And when we were down at Penn State, when we were, beating Ohio State, before the Big Ten championship game. So, I mean, it's not a hard sell. And I also think it's the truth. Jim is a lot like Bo. And like he wears that on his sleeve. He's got pictures of Bo in his office, right? He quotes Bo, really with regularity. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Jim did get to Minnesota and, he was there for 10 hours, 11 hours today before we heard this news. And he probably got pretty close to getting an offer today, or he got the offer today and considered it and said, this just doesn't feel right. But we'll never know. But I think if he comes back and he just says, this is where my heart is where I want to be. I don't think because he went through this process and considered that winning a Super Bowl is a dream of his, I don't think it makes, the statement that he wants to be at Michigan and he loves being at Michigan any less true.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when Ryans kind of took his name out, D'Amico Ryans, the Vikings job, that became pretty, he became really in the top, Harbaugh became really in the top two options there. At least to me with O'Connell, who it seems like they're zeroing in on right now. But I think you're right that he is a lot like Bo, and I think the want to or the desire to go to the NFL was there from the time he returned. I mean, it's always burned. I don't think he's truly kind of looked around previously prior to this year. But I think the one unique thing about Harbaugh, and from the media and pursuing other jobs thing, he typically doesn't float his name a lot. He doesn't try to work through agents or back channels, and I do think he did that a little bit this time. I think he kind of floated his name out there a little bit more than usual. But the other thing that's unique about him is he was telling recruits in December, before the early signing day, that he was gonna entertain the possibility. And in typical college football, that is not the route that most people go. Usually, it's lie as much as you can until you don't,
for as long as you can.
Yeah, for as long as you can, until you don't have to anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just not how he operates. I think his pitch that he's back and everything will be believable because everything he said previously has been believable. I don't think there's any reason to question Jim Harbaugh's word or honesty when he's been honest throughout the process. It got a little dark there in the last week. It seemed like all throughout the process he wasn't really talking to anyone. But especially the last week, it got real quiet, and it was just like, oh, maybe he's been lying this whole time. But I just think that's how he functions and he operates. He's a different guy, and that could be good and bad with different things. There'll be probably a nice kumbaya meeting with Ward, Manuel when he gets back, but with it turning out like this, I think Ward handled it well. Wasn't reactionary. Didn't wasn't over demanding, things like that. It's hard to know without being behind the scenes, but I, it's so hard to explain because this was just so much different than so many other of these things go. And the end result, when everybody, as of last night, it was reported that he was taking the offer
Mm-hmm.
by, by some credible people. Some backtracked and said there's no offer yet and things like that. But um, it, it was just such a unique process from start to finish that it's just kind of hard to. It was shocking to get to know, to read the tweet. I mean, I just reread it while you were talking. Like, I can't believe that this is where it ended up.
Well,
So
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of how Harbaugh gets people back on his side. He said, and I don't remember what this was in relation to, but at one point Jim said something like, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember a lot. And you mentioned, back in before early signing day, Jim told Darius Clemens, he's like, yeah, I'm going to look at NFL jobs. And he said, you know what, Josh Gaddis is going to be a head coach one day. Like, people are going to come and go from schools, and I'm going to look at, all my opportunities. So you pick a school for the school, but he's always told the truth. So if he comes back and he just says, this is where I want to be for, as long as you'll have me, then it's going to sound like the truth, because that's really all Jim does. And for better or worse, he doesn't worry, what that could lose him or what damage that could do, whether it's good or bad press. But Jim's an honest guy, so I think whatever he comes back and tells everyone at this point, tells Ward, tells the staff, it's going to read like honesty, because that's how Jim operates.
Yeah, and even in like recruiting and things like that, in the past when there's been media floated storylines about him, jumping back to the NFL, and he's acted almost surprised at times when he said, well, I said I was staying in Michigan, why didn't anyone believe me? Yeah, that's not a quote from him, but he just, for better or worse, just marches to the beat of his own drum type of thing. This is how I operate. I don't care what anyone thinks. And it, it's just not common. So people are so, the reaction from fans, media, outsiders, it's sometimes crazy from the reaction is, because they just don't, that's not how most people in this profession operate.
Yep. Yep.
So I think he's a hard guy to understand, because he's not like many other people. So it's
he's our weirdo.
He's our weirdo. That's right. Yeah. From from the end result, or from the process to the end result, the whole thing, it's been unique the whole way, because he's unique. It's the only way I can really say it. He operates differently than anyone else. So I imagine an extension will be signed here in the coming days. What do you think is next? Obviously, defensive coordinator search upcoming. What are your initial thoughts on that? How quickly, now that this information is known, how quickly do you think that search heats up?
I think it has to be first order of business, or maybe 1B behind. If you count like addressing, obviously you have to address the players as soon as you can, just as a team. But then kind of like the staff too, because, I don't, we touched on this, but while I don't think Jim ever told anyone he was going, because I don't think he ever had an offer, or, I think you mentioned it, people felt like they were maybe in the dark, because I just don't think he was giving anyone, great indications. So I think first order of business is make sure the current staff that's still here is like good to go, clear on intentions and the future, and then if that's 1A, then 1B is defensive coordinator search, and we can get into names there, but that's spring. You're kind of in a crunch here, right? With spring ball coming up here in March, but the nice thing is a lot of staffs out there are, February is the time when a lot of staffs are finalized. NFL staffs won't be finalized till after the Super Bowl. So if you're looking for an NFL assistant, you might not know for another couple weeks here. But you like to get that DC search wrapped up, like I would say within the next 2 weeks would be great. And we can get into names, but ideally it's someone that can mesh with every defensive assistant, and the scheme is not too different from what we're running, because there's not going to be a lot of time before spring ball by the time that person gets to Ann Arbor.
Yeah, I think there's a possibility for a potential new scheme, to go back to kind of a 4-2-5, but I just don't see that being the likely scenario. I think they're going to try to keep some continuity with the 3-man kind of front or overall style. They didn't play a ton of 3-4 base, but the hybrid edge rushers, the big defensive tackles. I think that overall style will be kind of what it is moving forward. I think there are a lot of options. We've talked about a few of them off air. Larry Foote immediately comes to mind. The initial pushback on that was if Byron Leftwich got a head coaching job, that Larry Foote would be his defensive coordinator. Doesn't look like that's going to happen for Leftwich. So, Foote could obviously stay and be the linebackers coach with Tampa Bay, but I would guess he would be, target 1A. A few of the other names out there, and Harbaugh, for the record, in the past, with coordinator hires, it's always been unpredictable. Even the first ones. I mean, Drevno, he was close with, but nobody thought Drevno would be the coordinator. Durkin was kind of an obvious part of the staff, but people didn't know. That was probably the most sure thing when he first came to Michigan. And then Pep Hamilton was obvious connection when he came along. But other than that, I mean, Don Brown, Gaddis, Mike McDonald, all of his coordinator hires haven't been, from the typical fan list like some of the other positions. Mike Elston's been mentioned as the line coach for Michigan forever. So when that one happens, it's like, oh, he went out and got him. Mike Hart, Clinkscale, the obvious targets for Michigan. Harbaugh seems to pursue a position coach, but coordinator usually comes out of left field. Jesse Minner would be a definite possibility. He was with McDonald with the Ravens, and there was talk last year that he would come with McDonald, but end up getting the defensive coordinator job at Vanderbilt. A few of the other names that I've thought of. There's a couple guys with the Ravens. Anthony Weaver, I believe, is the D line coach with the Ravens. I don't know if we'll go that route again. That seems like the easy route to go. But just some guys there to think about. I think if it's from the NFL, it'll likely be a position coach. And if it's from college, I really think they'll target someone with a 3-4 or 3-man front background. Any other potential staff movement we'll kind of discuss as it happens. I think there's still a chance that Matt Weiss could move on. I think he definitely would have went with Harbaugh if he would have got the Minnesota job. and there's been other things, I guess, in our little time off here. We have to wrap up, and we'll talk about early signing day. We'll wrap up kind of the class here in the coming weeks. We had planned to do a Georgia recap, and it just seemed like more news kept happening, and we were kind of waiting for the right time. And tonight really seemed to be okay. Let's hop on and talk about this one. This is a pretty big deal. I think one thing that we need to cover before we get out of here, I think the most satisfying thing from a fan standpoint is, a lot of the anxiety and the frustration from the fan base was the fear of not having a legitimate replacement, and the timing of that not lining up very well for Michigan. So I think, him coming back really, really is huge from that aspect, to continue to grow some of the assistants, expand the tree to have an eventual replacement when it is time for him to leave. Any more thoughts on just this announcement, the staff movement, defense coordinator search, anything else you got?
No, I concur. Like the coordinator is probably going to be someone that we know who's unexpected, or someone unnamed that is relatively new. As you mentioned, last year, before we went with Mike McDonald, an interesting name that was floated was Ejiro Evero, who's the secondary coach and pass game coordinator for the defense for the Rams. And we know Raheem Morris has been a hot name in NFL coaching search cycles. He had a second interview with the Vikings, in fact, along with Jim. And Evero is kind of a very well-regarded person on that staff. That people like Sam Webb had discussed briefly last cycle when we were looking for a DC, not in depth, but maybe another NFL position coach name in addition to Larry Foote that I would look at. But as you mentioned, it'll probably be someone that we haven't spent a ton of time discussing yet. But yeah, you mentioned it. This saves a lot of heartache and headache. Really heartache, obviously, but headache in terms of trying to put a staff back together or keep a staff together in February. In college, this is fairly normal time for NFL programs to be doing that, but we're very late in the college cycle. So this would have been a bit of a fire drill had Michigan had to figure out who their head coach and rest of the staff was going to be. And obviously that would have a ripple effect into 2023 recruiting and spring ball and everything. So this is a big relief, not only for, everyone, all the fans and people in the program itself that love Jim, but it's a big logistical relief for everyone involved as well. So we get to talk about more normal things in coming episodes.
Absolutely. Yeah. It'll be a little bit less unknown. I guess that fear of the unknown is always what can drive those anxious feelings, and be talking about a lot more familiar stuff in spring ball and throughout the summer and leading up to the season. So exciting night. Great news for Michigan fans. Jim Harbaugh is returning to Michigan in 2022 and should be the coach there for the foreseeable future. So with all that said, I appreciate you coming on short notice, Contown, and we'll be back here in the near future to wrap up some of the offseason stuff, probably to discuss a new defensive coordinator. And Ronnie will be joining us for all that. So For Contown, this is Matt. Appreciate you guys listening tonight. And as always, go blue.
Go Blue.